Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for attending tonight. We're going to have hopefully a very enlightening and informal conversation between some key people who are in charge of our waterfront. Two trustees, Chairman and Vice Chair Ed Warner Jr. and Scott Horowitz, and Supervisor Jay Schneiderman.
Yep.
Oh, there he is. I didn't see you. And town board member John Bouvier. Before we start the actual discussion, and we want it to be informal, and we hope to bring everybody up to date on some of the projects that are going on, and obviously we want you to ask your questions. When you do ask questions, if you could come up to the mic, if you don't mind, that it'll make life a lot easier. But before we go ahead, I just wanted to make some announcements. And just in general, we always try to have the minutes from our prior meeting available at the front desk and also online. So our last meeting, that was the executive director of the Peconic Baykeeper was here, and he was talking about the relationship between zoning and the impact it has on resource planning. So we have minutes, and it was really an enlightening discussion. What we also want to sort of push with everybody is that we have our new membership drive going on right now for 2017. So if you're not a member and you're interested, or if you'd like to renew, membership forms are up front. We also would like to always mention that we're always tremendously interested in volunteers. So if anybody ever wants to volunteer in anything that's of interest to them, please let us know. I don't know how many of you are aware, but the Suffolk County Legislative Committees are being held in Riverhead this week. They aren't normally held there. They're trying to do it on a rotational basis. So we have their schedule. If you're interested, again, at the front desk, you can take a look and see if there's any meetings you'd like to attend. There's been, I don't know how familiar you are with, but there's an Hampton Bays Economic Development Committee that's chaired by Deputy Supervisor Frank Sapone. And we just had a meeting recently, and there were there's a lot of good projects that are going on in Hampton Bays and within the town, and broader also, but in particular with Hampton Bays. And we sent in a letter that's available up front also to the town board and to Deputy Supervisor Frank Sapone, just discussing, how perhaps we could even just streamline a little bit more how information is made available to the community and be brought up to date, and listing some of the projects. So we're and I think we'll be talking about quite a few of them tonight, because there's a couple of key ones we'd like to talk about, which are the old Ponquag Bridge and the restoration of it as Maritime Park, and what's going on with the status and with FEMA, and also about beach access. And there's just a lot of issues, and if there are ones that we, in the pavilion, that renovation on the pavilion at Old Ponquag Beach. Now, if there are items that are not brought up tonight, please you bring them up. That's what we're trying to do. We also have, just as a little informational item, a handout about the trustees up front also, because we have such a unique relationship here in Hampton Bays, where we have elected trustees who predate even the Southampton Town Board, no offense on the board, but go back to the Donegan patent, and they're in charge of our waterfront and bottomways, and all, the water have such an impact, and they work together with the town board to protect the resources for the community, and it's a really unique, key relationship. And there he is, Ron, I'm sorry. Ron is the Civic president of Flanders and Franca, and he has a raffle that he would love people to hear a little bit about.
So we have a fundraiser that we're doing for the month of April. For $10, you buy a calendar raffle. We pick a winner each day of the month, and you win $50. So if anybody's interested in buying a calendar raffle after the meeting, it's $10. You fill it out, we take it, we put it in like a big bingo shaker, and then every day in the month of April, you have a chance of winning $50. If you do happen to win, we put your name back in, and you can win multiple times. So anybody that's interested in purchasing for $10, you're supporting our neighbors in Franca. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for letting me come.
Well, we think it's important for all the civics to work together. We have Al Algeri here from East Quogue, and we really think it's an important thing for us to do. Oh, also, I forgot to mention, right before we started, the director of the library, Susan LaVista, stopped by, and she dropped off some pamphlets that are at the front desk. And it's about the bond vote that's on March 14th in the library. And she was saying that there's a public meeting on March 7th. And she was hoping, anybody that was interested to come, they'll answer questions at the meeting. It's at 7 o'clock in the library. She also said she's always available during the week also. And then I'll close with the announcements with our next meeting, which is the Civics meeting, is March 27th. And we're having some town board members. Stan Glinka had asked to come, and some planning board members from the town, and they want to talk about some proposed rezoning of some parcels in Hampton Bays from the current zoning to Hamlet office. So that'll be our next meeting, which is March 27th. And our meetings in general are the fourth Monday of the month at 7, unless there's a holiday or something, that intervenes, or bad weather, like our last one. Okay, now if everybody could just stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we can start the meeting. Okay, as I mentioned, we have a really unique framework regarding the stewardship of our water resources, with the combination of having both the trustees and the Southampton Town Board. And the fact also that we are a unique hamlet surrounded on 3 sides by water. So tonight we thought it would be very important to bring the members of the 2 governing bodies about our water resources together, and hopefully talk to them about and have them talk about what are some of the issues that they're facing, what they think are some of the movement forward that we need to do, and just some of the issues involved. As I mentioned, there are 2 I know that I'm very interested in: status of the Old Ponquag Bridge revitalization, and also just what's going on with beach hardening and beach access. So I want to let Ed Warner and Scott Horowitz start off.
Thank you, Janice. Thanks for inviting us. It's very important to be communicating and educating the public, and it's very enlightening that we have such a very active and vibrant Hampton Bays Civic Association that cares so much about the community. And I thank you all for coming out to see us and hear us. So with that, I'll turn it over to President Ed Warner.
Yeah, excuse me. I'd like to give a little update on the bridge. I know everybody's been very patiently waiting to have it fixed as far as the fishing pier, but a little update. I guess I can tell you that right now the town is waiting for FEMA reimbursement. What had happened initially, the bridge was slated to be demolished completely and a new structure put in its place. But Scott, myself, and the town engineer, Christine Fenton, basically went out there and did basically a forensic look at the bridge, the pilings, and they were basically looked okay. On the outside, we had a diver go down and look at them, bore them out, and they were good enough to support a fishing pier. So the plan was to utilize the bridge as it was, preserving the underwater ecosystem, which has been 85 plus years in the making down there. There's a lot of rock structure. There's a reef down there. There's many different types of bait fish, and it's a unique habitat. So being that said, we're going to leave the bridge as is, taking the decking off of it, and a new set of plans and a new submission to FEMA. Well, that was a couple years ago, and finding out in government it works extremely slow. We have to go through the state agency and then the federal agency. We have good connections in Albany, and we have good connections in Washington. We have Lee Zeldin working hard to get this plan through as it is right now. But unfortunately, when the bridge was first going to be fixed and the money was supposed to be forthcoming, the town was going to do the project and then receive the money. It's my understanding now they're waiting to receive the money and then do the project. So basically that might put it off for a year or more. The plans are
not quite close.
Well, this is my...
Yeah, I'll just clarify that. So we have to get the final approval from FEMA.
Yes.
Then we will, first instance, we will spend the money. But unless we have that FEMA approval, we won't get paid back the money. So we're going to spend the money first, but not until FEMA says you're getting the money. So that's what we're waiting for, that final approval. We're pretty close to it, we believe. As soon as FEMA says, we've got verbal approval, as soon as we get written approval, the $600,000 that's already in place, the total project's cost is around $1.6 million. So we'll go out, the engineering, everything is designed and ready. So as soon as we get the written go-ahead, we'll go spend the money, and then we'll submit those receipts and get reimbursed.
Okay. Right. We are pretty far along because if you recall, we did hire the dive company. They did do the inspection of the pilings. It's already been ascertained that they're strong enough. Some of them have to be collared because they had a little bit of bore damage, but nothing that was going to be, super detrimental to the project. Then in addition, there was a substantial amount of the engineering already done to the project. So we're pretty far along to the point where I guess the verbal is good. If they could just firm that up, it would be good to see that project happen. It's really important for Hampton Bay's fishing community. Without a fishing pier, it kind of doesn't make sense. And people obviously, as you know, come from all over the world to dive there and train there. And we spend all this money trying to build these ecosystems with filtering bivalves for the benefit of water quality. Well, you have a natural system going on there right now. It makes most sense to preserve it. So it is good that the trustees and the town board keep the pressure where it needs to be, and that the community also does the same, so that we're successful in this project, because it fans out and it actually affects a lot of businesses and a lot of people and a lot of recreation and resources for Hampton Bay.
Yeah,
So
according to Zeldin's office, the FEMA approval still may be about 3 months out. It's coming our way, but it's a formal written approval. Hopefully sooner.
Yes, the plans are, it's a shovel-ready project. I mean, the plans have been approved and everything. It's just we're waiting for the money, and we've contacted everybody that I've contacted everybody that I know, and Scott has done the same. I imagine Jay and the town board has done also the same. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy and it gets kind of wound up.
Right, and so the project, and you may have more details. This predates me certainly, but on the north side, what remains of the old Pontchardt Bridge is being cut back all the way to the end of the road. But on the south side, the old structure, as you said, the redecking, and then they're going to refurbish the boat launch ramp and the parking areas as well. So that'll be an area for scuba diving, for boat launching, for fishing, for all kinds of things.
right, that is true, because the ecosystem on the bottom at the south side is different than it is on the north side. It's more sandy on the north side. The damage was worse because it was lower on the north side, so that's going to be cut back to basically a nub. There's also substantially less parking ability over there. But the south side is going to be an appropriate deck, appropriate railing, and it should be a very, very nice facility at the end of the day for people to fish, dive, enjoy the ocean beach, really experience Hampton Bays at its finest, in my opinion.
It's also named after a fine man.
My dad. Yep.
It's Dad's.
His father got me started as well. Put me on the Bay Constables back in the day.
There's a long legacy here.
There is.
At Warner Park. Yep.
There is one question that people have been asking me is about deterioration while we're waiting for the FEMA approval. It becoming more and more hazardous, and there was concern and questions about that.
Well, it has been off limits to public access for about a year now. They have a fence up there, and I know the Bay Constables patrol it. In the summertime, night and day both, because people were sneaking up there trying to go fishing. It's in pretty poor condition, especially the north side. No one should be on that right now. I mean, that's half of it. There's a whole section that's missing, and there's no lighting there, so I would recommend really staying off of it.
Yeah, that's dangerous. I've seen people going out there on the north side too.
Yeah,
but-
I know.
but-
When I walk the bridge, I see people.
It's dangerous.
Yeah.
But as far as deterioration under the water, it's been there for almost 90 years, so I don't think much is going to change in a year or so.
I think it's vintage, 1938.
Do you think it's
Prior.
mostly topical? Like,
It's whatever you can see on top of the water, yeah.
Yeah.
Whoop.
What else?
So now I know another. This one? I know another issue that has really people have been curious about and would love a little more information is the issue of just beach access in general. I know it's a wide topic and involves several different issues going on, but if perhaps you all could comment on it.
Well, first of all, in Hampton Bays, we have the Suffolk County Park, and Suffolk County does the, endangered species monitoring, the plovers and least terns. We do some of it to the western part of that from our office. There's been some questions that have been thrown around for the last year or so because of what happened in Southampton as far as the 24-hour beach access. Myself and Scott had discussions with a few members of SABA, possibly looking into the Triton area, which the trustees own as a beach access, and also a bay access. It's right next to the old hot dog beach, which the town has taken over, and it has water and septic there. And we thought it would be a good area, a potentially good area for maybe a drive-on, drive-off access during the summertime, during the daytime. But over the last 6 or 8 months, looking at the area, the beach is very narrow, and it wouldn't be promoting any access as far as 4x4s and walk-on people as far as surfers and bathers. It's too narrow. We've had a discussion with the supervisor, and I believe he's touched base with the county executive as far as to the east of Tiana, which is the town, the county-owned property along there, to possibly do that. Well, the last couple of weeks I've done quite a bit of 4x4ing up there, and there's really no beach even left there. So we're having the Fish and Wildlife people come out and to give us an overview of permits and what we would need to do any of these programs within this area. And it's pretty complicated because if we open an area for 24-hour beach access, we're going to have to close other areas. And one of the problems that I really have with potentially open the area by the county area would be that the county people would have access to it too. And that was one of the court cases that we fought very hard for, to keep the beach access specifically for the freeholders, taxpayers of the town of Southampton. Jay, would you like to comment a little bit on it?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's true, but you may be able to regulate it because they can't get down there unless they go through a trustee road, right? So, Janice, when you mentioned, first of all, thank you for having this. Thank you to the Hampton Bay Civic Association and for having all of us here. We've jumped right into the questions. But water is, I think, on everybody's mind, and I've had a fairly long history in terms of preserving, we're trying to protect both our drinking water and our surface waters. It's interesting, Hampton Bays, as we all know, was not the original name. It was Good Ground, and I guess the focus was more on the ground, and the focus with Hampton Bays is more on the water. And I think it's important that we protect both, obviously. We think, in the early days, a lot of the focus was on drinking water, and I think it probably still needs to be, because we do live atop of our aquifer, but we've been understanding more and more about how our development patterns and the way we live affects not just our drinking water, but our bays and our harbors and various wetlands. And I see Kevin McAllister is here, who I've known for a long time, in the days when I was at the legislature, and he would come fighting to try to change the county's vector program where they sprayed for mosquitoes and some of the pesticides. And Kevin actually went so far as to sue the county, and try to rein in some of the pesticide uses. So this has been a long battle, but it's also been a growing understanding about the way, some of the things we do and how it affects our environment. And I think the biggest piece recently is understanding how our septic systems obviously are affecting the nitrogen levels in these harbors, and how the increased algal blooms are affecting shellfish populations and finfish populations, and really changing the ecosystems that we have come to know and love. We've seen areas closed off for shellfishing, and we've been really struggling to find new innovative ways to restore the quality of our bays and harbors. That being said, though, this question has to do with beach access. So when we say beach access, obviously there's different ways to approach it. I think the question here has to do with four-wheel drive access to the beach. But the topic of beach access obviously is much broader. Beaches belong to the people. And we have seen through the years, as estates are built along the ocean, a desire to make it more private. And I have fought against that, trying to make sure that the public, the average person, can enjoy God's creation, can have those experiences out in nature, to be able to walk along a pristine beach, that it's not just the exclusive domain of, the 1%. So these are often very difficult battles, and I think, we depend on groups like the Trustees to fight for access to those places so that we don't lose those really, really important natural resources. Now, four-wheel drive is an interesting question because somewhere, and I don't know what year it was, the town said, we're going to restrict driving four-wheel drive on the beach. Before that restriction, you could take your truck anywhere onto the beach, and a lot of people did it. We have a long, proud maritime history. Guys like Scott and Ed, who's, I don't know how many generations of baymen. It really, to be able to go out and to drive to these places and surf cast or to, go clamming, whatever it might be. But the town passed the law, and it said you're not going to drive on the beach from Memorial Day to Labor Day between, I think it's 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And the community probably reluctantly at that point, there's probably a lot of, controversy, accepted it. And so it turned out there was only one place in the town of Southampton, happened to be in the village of Southampton, where during that period you could drive, and they called it the picnic area, not far from the Shinnecock Inlet on the east side of the inlet. And it became actually very controversial because there were so many trucks there that they said, is there another spot? Is there another place where people can go to kind of lessen the load? All these people from all over, west of the canal, east of the canal, are going to this one spot. And Saba came to me, and Hot Dog Beach was the first spot that they asked about. Town has a parking lot there. We looked at it. I had some issues. At first I said, okay, it seemed like it might be an appropriate location, but in Hampton Bays there's I think 4 beaches with parking lots. There's Ponquag, Tiana. There's a place called Sandbar Beach. Is that what it's called? Sandbar Beach, and then there's the old Hot Dog Beach. And I'd hate to lose any of those as a possible bathing beach. Where families can lie out on blankets during the summer, and you can't really mix a bathing beach with beach driving. It just doesn't work. And Hot Dog Beach, where Triton Lane is, actually has a parking lot. So if we're going to have a bathing beach, that's a spot to do it. If you went today and said, you know what, I want to build a brand new parking lot, good luck. It's not going to happen. So there's too many environmental regulations. So you don't want to have to go in and clear sand dunes to build parking lots. So I felt that it probably was not the best spot over by Triton Lane. So I started looking at the area, you may know, between Road K and L. So kind of west of the Ponquag Pavilion, about a half a mile to the west, there's a stretch of beach. It's beautiful. People do walk it, but there's not a lot of activity. And I thought maybe here during those prohibited hours, because you already drive on it after 6 p.m., but maybe between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. on a very limited basis, that could be a possibility to take some of the pressure off of Southampton. But I haven't really been pushing the issue. There's some people who thought it was a great idea, some people thought it was a horrible idea. But I know the trustees have discussed it a little bit, Saba has discussed it, but there hasn't been really a lot of anybody really pushing to make it happen. And I think the beach is pretty thin right there, right now. So if it were to happen, it would have to happen in a very controlled way. A very limited number of cars for a very limited point, a very limited period. And
well, it's also part of the reason why we haven't Fish and Wildlife come in, because it's more than just the trustees or the town making a decision that that's what they're going to do, because you have to deal with that Federal Endangered Species Act. And the reality is that there's a long history in our town of being very successful at providing the balance between public access and nature, and having a successful program. So if you're engaging in any activity that creates what's called take of any of these birds, you have to deal with the federal government on that. And there are certain permits and parameters that you have to work by, and that's why you'll see that public access is choked down in a lot of areas of the town on the beach. during the summer months because there's all types of bird activity going on. So the reality is that it's a long road to even be able to get up to base to even think you could be successful on that, because you got to deal with the federal government and the birds. And that's why they're coming in on the 6th, to see exactly if it's possible.
Right.
To even do, because if there's a lot of issues with it, then it may not be viable. So we don't know. So hopefully we'll know more on March 6th. Obviously any decisions that are made require substantial consideration, and you have to do your homework, and it's the beginning of doing the homework.
Well, I just want to be clear. It would not be opening up an area that is where trucks are currently not allowed to drive. The trucks are allowed to drive there. It's just during those few months, Memorial Day to Labor Day, between those hours, trucks are not allowed to drive. So it just would be opening up during that prohibited time an area that you're already allowed to drive trucks. But whether it's a good idea or not, I drive on the beach. I don't do it very often. I do like to surf cast. I understand that people love this. It's part of our heritage, part of our history, being able to access these places by four-wheel drive truck. And some people feel that there never should be a truck on the beach, that they're not roads, that leave it to nature. I understand that sentiment, but I think you have to find that right balance. And we have, I don't know how many miles of coastline, but
I think 26.
26 miles of coastline. I think a small section somewhere, might be appropriate if we can come to a community consensus.
Well, I've mentioned, and I know some people feel this way, that, I take the tack that I think we are so blessed that in Hampton Bays we have one section of the beach that I guess it's county owned, but it's unblemished. There's no real building on it. So I kind of take the tack that I would be kind of sad to see four-wheel drive enhanced usage of it in that area. And I know you talk about the area of K&L, the alphabet area, but I know that's like my favorite place to go. And during the summer, that's usually totally parked up. If you don't get there early, you can't get a parking space. I know, talking to people, they walk all the time in that area. I also know, I think Bonnie is Bonnie around? She can attribute to this about the cycling that goes on the road in the area too, and there's concerns about that.
Right. Those are important considerations. Yeah. Remember though too that there are individuals who are physically disabled that would have a hard time reaching those areas unless they were able to get closer to that spot.
Well, what I was interested in was the plan that I believe the trustees had about doing some sort of a parking area. Was it at Hot Dog?
That was the first Triton idea that we had, was to put like since there is a parking lot there, it is surrounded by wetlands, and we were trying to come up with a brainstorm compromise at first, and that was, we own, I think, around 1,000 or 1,200 feet of beach there. I think the town spent about $20 million there. And Hot Dog's not being used, and we thought that it would be a good compromise where if it was a rustic type of a setting in the parking lot with a clamshell base, perhaps an area for barbecue, there's already a septic system there, maybe a small restroom, and there's already a beach walkover to get to the beach. And if the beach is narrow, there's no room for trucks on the beach, but at least people could go there and enjoy the resource, walk over use the walkover to get to the beach and have a barbecue there. And then also on the bay side, there's an osprey pole there, and there's an excellent area where you could be kayaking or paddleboarding or canoeing and enjoy the bay side. So it's kind of an interesting area where there could be some sort of a compromise, is what we first thought, because we wanted to relieve some pressure in Southampton, and based on the fact that there was 1,200 feet. It was actually pretty far away from other houses. The trustees own the access road. The town owns the parking lot. Maybe there's compromise that works out. But, when you're being sued in the village for $19 million over, beach access issues and four-wheel drive, and you're trying to work with everybody, and like the supervisor said, well, you're trying to maintain a sensible balance. You want to see people in the community benefit from the resource that, a lot of taxpayer money was spent on. You want to be respectful of the environment at the same time, and, you understand you got to coexist with other people that live there. So we thought it maybe would have been a compromise to work out, since some of the aspects already exist there, and people could enjoy it. So, again, it's a process, and I think through the respectful dialogue of the community and both boards, we'll arrive at something that makes sense, but it's a process.
Well, to start this whole discussion off, we had the Bay Constables go down from basically the Quogue Town line to the inlet and do a site visit as far as, the ability to use 4x4s, the ability to park there. And it came back pretty negative. There was a very narrow beach. There was very little driving area. You actually couldn't get past, from Triton. You couldn't get past, Tiana Beach. It was almost washed out to the pavilion. And then this winter really took the beach out pretty bad in that area and points east towards, Ponquag. So looking at it right now, I think nature's going to determine that it's probably not a good idea to put, any 24-hour beach access there anytime right now.
Yeah.
So, I think nature's going to determine what goes on.
Pretty quiet. It really has not. There's no proposal on the table right now.
No, nothing.
There's none, and I don't see Saba or really any group really pushing this issue. So, you might just let sleeping dogs lie here. If the community pushes to open up an area, we can look at it and do the environmental reviews, etc. But right now, my phone's been quiet on that issue. So.
And the supervisor hit the nail on the head. There'll be a whole environmental review if anything like this goes forward. So there'll be public hearings, public input, so people in the town will be able to have their say.
And, Janice mentioned the pristine nature of that stretch of beach, and you are really blessed in Hampton Bays. You have water all around you, and that is really an extraordinary spot to be able to walk without any development for a couple miles is really special. And, it makes this really an extraordinary place. One of the things that make Hampton Bays extraordinary.
Why don't we take some questions now from the audience?
Just while we're on the topic, I was just curious about just like dredging, and you're talking about like the beach and how it tends to shift in the winter and the summer, and sometimes you see the bridge closed with the sand trucks. How is the town involved in that, and how was the determination made this winter we need more? Can you just explain that process a little bit? And then that dredger thing was in Rhode Island forever.
Yeah. So and Ed probably wants to weigh in here too. So. I've been involved with dredging issues for a while when I was with the county, because typically Suffolk County is the main entity that is doing dredging. So Suffolk County, though we don't do the Shinnecock Inlet because it's a federal inlet, but a lot of the smaller waterways, like the Shinnecock Canal, the county recently dredged in around there. And I believe dredging is really important. It hasn't gotten as much credit from the environmental community as it should, because dredging not only is good for navigation, but it also allows water to flow better. And we need that flushing of water more than most people, I think, realize. When you have currents, then you get colder water rushing in, more oxygen rushing in, you get the contaminants, the concentrations decrease as the water rushes out. So dredging is really important, and the county really never has had an adequate budget for dredging, but it's been better in the last few years than it had been. But the trustees also get involved in dredging too, in some of the smaller water bodies. Maybe Ed, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, but I want to just hit on the subject of the bridge being closed. That was a restoration that the town overtook, basically between K Road and Tiana. They wanted to build up the berm so it didn't wash over, and all that sand was trucked in. It didn't come from a dredging project. The dredging project that you probably are most familiar with was the stockpile of sand between Ponquag and K Road, where there was probably 300,000 cubic yards of material placed there when they dredged the inlet out 2 times ago. The last time they dredged it, most of the material went just west of the Shinnecock Inlet, because that Crescent Beach there is getting cut out, and it's almost going to overwash the Dune Road. So that's pretty much the dredging as far as the inlet. And I think there's going to be another dredging project next year in the Shinnecock Inlet area. And hopefully that material will go closer to the inlet, because it transitions down to the west. The littoral drift along the beaches from east to west. So you put it by the inlet, and eventually it ends up at Tiana and points west. Jay was talking about, dredging in the smaller creeks and harbors. Last year, the county did 8 dredging projects in our town. which being that there's probably 107 days of dredging that they do. It's a pretty phenomenal amount of dredging that we got done in our town. We work very closely with the county. We have good, monitoring of the areas where the deposition is put. It's enhanced for the wildlife, the plovers and the terns nest there, so it's a good. And we monitor that very closely around each one of the dredging spoil areas. So anything that we do benefits the navigation, the flushing of the creeks in the harbor, and the endangered, birds that migrate here and nest here. So there's a lot of different, and we also promote bigger beaches in some of the areas too, because we pump most of the sand on the beach for the public to have a nice wide beach to lay their blankets on.
Does that answer your question?
One further thing on dredging, though, is that you have to be very careful and very strategic. The town has to be in terms of how they purchase property and hold property. Because if you're taking on a dredging project in a creek, any of the creeks that we have here in the town of Southampton, you need some place to deposit the dredge spoils. Even if it's not permanent, even if it's just a temporary time to dewater it so that you can move it to an appropriate spot. And if you're holding the land in the name of the Community Preservation Fund, we cannot dewater dredge spoils on that property, to my understanding. And that's a problem. And that's why we have to be very strategic on if parcels are acquired, perhaps some of them should be in the name of the trustees, because at least that way there would be more flexibility in utilizing that property to dewater the dredge spoils with a net benefit to the environment, and you don't have these creeks all locked up. So with the development that's taken place along the waterfront and a lot of it being put into preservation, which is good, you also have to realize it could be a double-edged sword when you do need a spot to dewater your dredge spoils to get that water flow and get that siltation out. And we are a maritime hub. We need to maintain good navigation through our creeks and our channels to have, what we do here in Hampton Bays and throughout the entire town of Southampton. So you have to be very strategic working between the trustees and the town and the planners on, we better try and put something in the names of the trustees or some entity that will permit that activity. Otherwise, it all gets locked up and it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, we've been very successful working with the county. We took a piece of property over for back taxes that we had to pay over in Flanders, Fantasy Drive, and we used that for a deposition site, and we're going to hopefully acquire another piece of property that adjoins that through the town and New York Rising, so that we can have a larger deposition area. There are two creeks over the Sylvan and Royal Canals that need dredging on a regular basis, and without those deposition sites, we wouldn't be able to have those projects done. One project that we did in Hampton Bays is Foster's Creek. Right. The property owner, Mr. Stabelic, let us use his boatyard to put the deposition material, let it dry out, and we actually sold it to the Ponquag Manor down the road there so that they can raise the grade up of their motel site. So, we accomplished a couple things there. We got the creek dredged out for navigation and flushing, and we benefited a property owner with some, very, I wouldn't say cheap, but very affordable material.
Right.
I just wanted to make the point about the spoils. We have, and Ed's absolutely right, there's certain properties that are available, particularly in Flanders from New York Rising. There's about 11 to 16 properties. Not all of them are suitable to put the spoils on, so that's an important point. So not all of them are accessible, but the county's also offered up to us foreclosed properties that we are looking at to put cluster systems for septic control, but as well as areas that we can store dewater the spoils that come up there. But it's not, access is a big problem. To access some of those properties would be destructive by its very nature of doing that. So determining what those properties are is difficult. As Scott said, CPF does not allow us to do that. In some cases that makes a lot of sense, but in some cases I don't think it totally makes sense, and that's something that we want to look at carefully, where there are properties that will not be built upon, but they are controlled under state law, and that's something that would have to be changed, so it takes a while to do that.
First, I want to thank you all for protecting our environment, and I'm really glad to hear the priority remains nature. I'm a little taller. I do have a question because I haven't heard any updates about plans for the Shinnecock Bay on the west side, which is near where you live, Ed. Jackson's Marina, I understand, is being discussed for a change. And I traveled over the bridge to come here because I live in Shinnecock Hills, not Hampton Bays. And it's my side of the canal that I'm very particularly concerned of, because it is facing a lot of problems with pollution and nitrogen. And I feel that we haven't heard too much of a discussion, because it does feed into the Shinnecock Inlet, what the plans are for protecting that area, because it has a lot of issues, and we haven't discussed that tonight. I'm also concerned about the runoff from Rumba that hasn't been addressed, and that area from Cowfish up to where Rumba is. Could you kindly give us an update on both sides, what's happening there, please?
As far as Jackson's Marina, I don't want to say too much. We have some applications before us that we just got, were just submitted to us. We haven't even had a chance to review them yet. One of them is for a rock revetment along the beach between Teepee Street and Jackson's Marina. We've asked the applicant to pull it back and take it out of our jurisdiction, put it upland so that we can maintain a nice beach for the public there. It's important that, if you put a rock revetment close to the water, the beaches seem to dissipate, and then the public doesn't have any area to walk on. So we've asked them to pull it back, and I believe the DEC has also asked them to pull it back. As far as Jackson's Marina, I hear through the grapevines it's being sold. We got some paperwork in our office for some, some agreements that they want signed and stuff like that. We really haven't got into the nuts and bolts of it, so I really don't want to discuss it in public until, the board has had a formal chance to review the application. As far as the canal and behind the old Altenkirks, the applicant has submitted plans to basically clean that where the floating dock is between the Montauk Bridge and the old Tide Runners. There's an application before us that they want to put some natural rocks there, and basically pull back all the asphalt and all the concrete and all the rubble that's falling into the canal. They want to clean it up. That's before us in a review right now. One of the questions that I had is that how we're going to, protect and maintain public access along there, and that's one of the sticking points, with the application as a whole, which is, another something that the town board's wrangling with, not us. As far as Rumba and the issues down there, Kevin McAllister and was very instrumental in helping the public and the town, basically put a new septic system in there, basically in place of an old septic system, which was basically in the groundwater. So it's kind of a difficult situation where you have a an old fishing station that they made into a restaurant, and a very successful restaurant with a lot of use. How do you take that in consideration? It's not something that the trustees deal with, it's something that the town board has to deal with. And there are more than one place like that. I mean, I could talk about Dockers and other places around that have very high volumes of people using their restaurant and restrooms, and a lot of issues with septic, being that they're the proximity to the bays and stuff like that. But that's something that the town board has to take on. And as far as Cowfish goes, we have an application before us to do some rocks and natural grass and revegetation around the whole entire perimeter of Cowfish around the water. That was just submitted to our office about a month ago, when that's under review too.
Now, you say clean up in the bay, I think fish, because we spent a lot of time cleaning up fish around that bay, which I think is looking pretty good today.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, last time was at Jackson's Marina, it was with you.
Yeah, we were.
I think we helped clean up, like 40,000 pounds of fish just in that one area.
That was a very tough situation that we had to deal with there.
What was the final toll of fish that was removed?
Several, like 300,000 pounds, something like that.
It was surreal in the morning when we were down there at the Shinnecock Canal, the supervisor and myself. And we watched the locks open up, and we watched that whole mass just drift to the south into the bay. And I jumped on one of the constable boats and went out with it. And we obviously went into some type of a program to deal with it, which was quite the task. But we did, and I think that we got through that as best as we possibly could.
We were not expecting to have literally, millions of dead fish in Shinnecock Bay. It was I'm sure all of you saw it. It was really quite a extraordinary environmental event. It wasn't that the bay could not sustain the life. There was a misconception. People assumed that it must be a water quality issue, but it was just basically too many fish in a small area that they just used up the oxygen and died. And some of it ended up being converted to fertilizer, compost, through our own municipal waste facility. But I have to say that considering there was no plan, what do you do when suddenly the bays are filled with dead fish, we kind of pulled together and we developed a plan, and within a relatively short period of time, I have to thank Will Caldwell too, who really is a local commercial fisherman who really helped assist us. But we were able to get a tremendous number of fish out of the water before they got really stinky, because that's what happens as they biodegrade. They produce sulfur gases. So we did the best we could in the circumstance. A lot of it ended up in Meadow Lane in the village of Southampton. I think there's still
It's still there today. We did work nonstop,
today, but yeah, we really showed that the branches of government, everybody could come together and try to address something before it became a real, far worse catastrophe.
Yeah, completely out of the ordinary. There was no manual for dealing with that. We just had to deal with it ASAP. So when you say clean up the bay, sorry, but it's too soon. I go right to that event. It was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it may not happen again. It was unusual circumstances. This big moon and all these fish being chased into the canal.
Big bluefish.
By bluefish, and it was just a staggering number of fish. So, we had you may not know too, it's another Shinnecock Bay issue. We had a water main break. I don't know if people followed that, but you may have seen the equipment there. But Hampton Bays has its own water district, and there's literally a line, a water main that runs along the bay bottom, and it comes up on Dune Road, and it goes out all the way down to Oakland's, and it snapped right in the middle, right in the bay bottom, and we shut down the water supply to Dune Road in that section. And it's hard to imagine, but literally, some of you may know Rich Neidiger. He's a local diver and science teacher, but they dove down. There's video footage on YouTube. You can see there's 5 hours worth of footage, but they were able to repair the pipe and get it back up and running. I think we're still waiting on Suffolk County Health Department to allow us to turn it on. They're still doing some testing, but they ran so you may have seen, if you've crossed the Ponkwag Bridge, all the way to the left as you're heading toward the ocean, there's a couple pipes that's supplying water currently, and soon hopefully we'll be able to turn the water main on. But it was pretty remarkable, repairing this pipe underwater. You imagine, it's pretty cold down there, and you had huge currents. One of the days, at least one of the days, the Shinnecock tidal gates were being repaired, and they were open, and there was this extraordinary current that the divers were trying to repair this pipe and trying to stay in place against this tremendous current. So it's quite a story, but the pipe has been repaired.
Sorry, I was watching them from the bridge do it. So.
Yeah, how come you weren't in there? That's too cold for you, right?
Too cold for me. I'm a warm water girl these days. In a previous life, yeah. My question...
If you don't know, Maria is quite the expert diver and instructor, so... And John, too. John is another scuba diver.
And so is Jay.
Well, certified, but novice.
My question is that we've been talking about a break between the Ponkwag Bridge and West Hampton, somewhere in the East Quag area. The canal with all that polluted water, whether it be a break or a pipe. Is it possible to use some of the funds that have now come through on this water give back from CPF? And if so, is it going to limit what's going to happen with that break and how it's done?
Well, I'll attempt to answer that. The short answer is yes, but there's a lot to look at to understand look at projects from tidal gates to other examples in California where they've created artificial inlets. It's a lot of private property issues. There's just a whole bunch of issues that are involved. But originally we did have discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers almost a year ago, and the pricing of that was, it's a bit high. It's would probably, if you did an artificial inlet, would equal the cost of the entire balance of our CPF fund at this point. So we look at other ways of doing things, and I know we've had discussions here before about reversing the Shinnecock Canal, and the volumes of waters in short calculation it's helpful, but it's not going to solve that problem completely. We did contract with Chris Goblers to do a study. He actually internally they did a dynamic study for us for the bay bottom, so we can understand which way the water is going, how it works in tidal cycles, what the depths are, and that we can start looking at how we would deflect some of this water, what the volumes would be. And they're staggering volumes of water. I mean, if you look at Shinnecock Inlet, it's about 140 million cubic feet of flow there. It is a staggering amount of water, and it has a limited effect that's not so much felt towards the north, but and that has a lot to do with the bottom profiles and where that water comes in and out. So a lot of communities have looked at ways of doing things with tidal gates. And these are smaller flows but over a wider area with a larger impact. But without having a better understanding of the dynamics of the bay bottom, it's not a good thing to comment on to any specificity right now until that work is done. I have asked Chris to expand his study and come back with the topography of the bay bottom and current directions and flows and volumes and sediments. And if we have that, then we can start to look at what's viable to do. It's clearly an area that would be perfect. Although maybe neighbors might not agree and other people might not agree, there's an aesthetic component. It's not just you build something, you have to do it with the needs of the community in mind, but that is also effective. I hope that begins to answer your question.
It begins to answer it. The question is, how long will it take?
Well, it depends on the project. If it was an artificial inlet, that could take years.
Right.
And one of the problems with CPF funding is that we go from year to year, and we're restricted in what we can use to pay for that. So if we pay for the studies, we can't use CPF to pay for the study. We have to pay for that up front to find out what it will actually cost, and then we would make an application for CPF funding to do that. But I should emphasize that we are currently, our main focus with the CPF water quality, the 20%, is for septic system replacement and septic mitigation. That's our main focus right now because that's an immediate problem, but it doesn't preclude us from doing two things at the same time.
I understand that, and it's a very personal issue for me, but
know.
I don't see where we are doing septic mitigation and yet we're allowing all this development, which is just, putting right back what we're trying to mitigate.
Well, I agree. I mean, if we start talking about the CPF fund itself and what we're doing for the 20%, what we're working right now to define some of that. Part of that is a law that would require the use of these systems in specific areas that are identified as high nitrogen loading, use them in new construction, substantial remodeling. But we don't also, by the same token, we don't want to burden people with those costs if they can't afford it. And we've been told this average septic system replacement is $7 to $12 million, and then there's an overhead, there's an installation. These costs over.
Say that again. The
average cost of the system is
of
7
a
to
sewage
12
treatment facility
of a septic system, a residential septic.
is how much?
7 to 12 thousand.
Thousand.
Yeah. Oh, did I say million?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. That's for the big one. And some of those.
Must be on commission. He must be on commission.
I'm already thinking about your inlet, Maria.
And thank you for that, John.
But some of the septic systems that we're talking about also, it's not just saltwater. We're dealing with freshwater bodies as well. One of the new systems will mitigate phosphorus. It has an oxidizer in it, and so there's a whole lot of stuff to think about. But I absolutely agree with you. It's not a linear thing. It's a serial approach that we want to take.
As long as you're thinking about it, that's a
I think
start.
about it every day.
Thank you.
On the subject of, openings, I mean, we're charged with the responsibility of Mecox Bay, Mecox Cut. And Mecox Bay, for 300 years, been managed by the trustees, and it's a substantial water quality issue that's managed by opening up that cut and carefully paying attention to the salinity and fecal coliform trends and various other aspects of that. And without us being able to do that, you basically see that entire system die. All the shellfish, finfish.
You saw, I was going to say, I think it was maybe Superstorm Sandy where there was a breach over in, I think, Bellport in Mauritius Bay. And that area came bursting back to life. Once you had that exchange with ocean water and bay water, it's important to remember Shinnecock Bay wasn't always a bay. It was a lake. Until 1938, the Shinnecock Inlet wasn't there. It was a breach. And it changed the entire marine environment, obviously. But the further you now go from the Shinnecock Inlet, the worse the water quality gets. So as you start going up toward Tiana and further, Weesa Creek into Quantuck Bay, you see, pretty much almost like a linear function. The further you go, there's less water movement, less flushing, and worse. And not just more houses, though. You have some areas. It's true, the houses are a big piece of it, but you have areas where it's not just a function of how many houses. It's more a function of how far you are away, because there's houses throughout that region. But if you could get a water exchange, whether it's from pumping water or tidal gates or some kind of engineered inlet, it's tricky because you'd have to find a spot. You don't want to build a bridge over it, right? You don't want to have another full inlet like you have at Shinnecock. You have to get vehicles back and forth over it. So there's different ways of doing it, but we wouldn't be the first. This all over the world, they're doing things like that where they're engineering inlets to allow for water exchanges.
I wouldn't be true to my profession as an engineer to say that all engineering is good, because it's not. And sometimes I think things have been done in the past that without really a thought towards the future, and in fact we didn't know, and that's a fair thing to say. But where you restrict or dig canals and restrict flow, and you create high velocity flows and scouring and a whole bunch of other problems, it's the dynamics of the bay that are critical to that. So it's not always a one-to-one relationship between the number of houses or the number of flushes, I like to say, and the effluents that get into the nutrients that get into that water. It's not always one-to-one. It has a lot to do with the geology, and it has a lot to do with the hydrology and the runoff and so forth. But these are things we understand much better today than we ever have, and I think we can make a big progress in being able to help our bay recover, not to its natural state prior to 1938, obviously, but to the state that we enjoy it now with the finfish, shellfish, and the populations that we have growing. We need to restore it biologically as well as aesthetically.
I don't think there's one answer. I mean, I think swapping septic systems for advanced wastewater is one of the answers. I think getting fresh water is another one of the answers. Preserving land and preventing development or limiting development, I think, is another piece of the answer. You have to realize too that even if you change all these septic systems out, there's what John refers to as the legacy problem, that there's nitrogen moving toward the bay from toilets that were flushed 30 years ago that haven't got to the bay. The new septic system isn't going to take care of that, though there are some things like permeable reactive barriers and there are other technologies that could address some of that legacy issue. There's a lot of research going on right now. Chris Gobler's a part of that, and using algae, what they call macroalgae, to actually pull some of the nitrogen out of the water without the problems that the microalgae cause, which is all the various things, blocking the sunlight, decomposing in the water column. The macroalgae they can actually harvest and pull out. So there's some promise. So
even looking at it to the point of looking at different types of chlorophyll, which is an interesting subject. We just look at algae and think, okay, we've got algae of various colors, and we call them rust tides and red tides and so forth. But there's a lot more complex sciences, biology that's going on there, and there are things that are emerging quickly. And you're doing this work, Mark, and it's really interesting to see how people have embraced this and are working hard towards it. To see our educational institutions doing this big time is really heartening to me, because I feel that we're going to be able to implement the technologies that come out of that and very quickly.
John, do you realize your concept that you're talking about, opening an inlet in Western Shinnecock Bay, is something that the trustees used to regularly do?
Yeah,
we used to
duck farming
I think Native Americans used to regularly do it.
Because poor water quality in Shinnecock Bay is something that's not new. It was there in the 1800s and 1900s, and the trustees would regularly open an inlet in Western Shinnecock Bay prior to the 38 hurricane.
Why did you stop?
Yeah.
We still have the authority now.
Probably lawsuits probably stop us.
No, but it's a concept that But one of the problems that I have,
Ed,
Probably houses built, right?
I'll answer that really quickly. 400, 500 years ago, when Native Americans were doing that, it was done by hand. It was really quite an amazing thing to watch. And everybody knows that. Anybody who lives near a coastline, who watches water, who lives in it and fishes in it, knows that without adequate flushing, you're going to get these stagnant pools. But on a large scale, like Shinnecock Inlet, that's
at the cost of $5,000, we would open the inlet back in the 1800s. That's what it cost back then. So,
well, the area you're talking about has a big accordion effect. The water moves, and it moves back, then it moves more, then it moves back, and it takes a long time to get it to move. And if you remember when Pikes was open, when was that? In the 80s? Pikes was
90s.
90s. The 90s, the water was a lot better.
But back in the 1800s, you know what the big source of pollution was? Right, ducks. Right.
Millions of
So
them.
a lot of nitrogen. But I also want to make the point, as we talk about advanced wastewater systems for homes, that nitrogen is not the only problems the bays are facing. It's the rising temperatures, which in part is global warming, but the water temperature is rising and making it difficult for some marine species to continue to thrive. Also, warmer water holds less oxygen, which is a problem for marine life. We have phosphorus issues. We have other contaminants in our bays and harbors. So just swapping out residential septic systems to these advanced wastewater may reduce the nitrogen, but we still have a lot of other work to do to really get those bays and harbors back to supporting the kind of marine life that they historically did support.
Well, one of the projects that we're doing with the Southampton College is the Shinnecock Bay restoration, and they've managed to put about $3 million worth of clams, with us closing some of the areas to shellfishing in Tiana and Weesick, and also working with the trustees getting permits for oyster reefs in the Western Shinnecock Bay. There's going to be 12 oyster reefs. So, I mean, we're literally going to be putting millions and millions and millions of shellfish in the bay to help the filtration of the water. So, we and the college are doing what we can do on a very limited basis, but on a broader spectrum, you got to do the holistic approach, like John and Jay are talking about. It has to do with the septic and road runoff and stuff like that. There's many different issues that we have in the environment. It's just not one thing. So you can't, if you stop one thing, there's other things that are going to be there.
Yeah, and I think it's also incumbent on us as residents to do things. We started the Tiana Educational Center that should be open this spring. That's a way to teach people exactly that, how to grow their own oysters and clams, and how to move that philosophy out among others. Establish aquaculture as a potential economic, viable economic source here as an industry for potentially for people to. At the same time you're making money, you're also helping do something good for the bay. So we're working with Cornell and at Tiana to do that. That's the center that's right across from Tiana Beach, and we're also we'll be working with Stony Brook up in Weesick Creek up there. There's an area that we're looking at right now to start some of these small sort of incubator educational facilities that other people can pick up and learn. Using solar flow season off the grid, so you don't have to plug into things. So you have natural ways of growing shellfish and natural restoration, natural replenishment, and the trustees have led that work for a long time. And it's good to see that it's going to come to fruition, because I think people are finally realizing how important it is, as we work on the technical issues, to work on, as the supervisor said, to work on the biology and restore it.
I'm just going to quickly say that two things. Number one, if you look at what happened in the Great South Bay with the break, it's not a final solution, it's just temporary, but it hasn't migrated, it hasn't disturbed the surrounding homes, and it's totally revitalized the bay from something that was dead to 99% healthy. So it is a temporary solution, but one that needs to be done sooner rather than later.
It didn't cost anything either.
Yeah, if we had a natural break.
Didn't we close up that natural break?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we had a natural break now, I think we would have a different attitude towards it than we have in the past, depending obviously where that break occurred.
Right. And the other thing is, if you would just elaborate a little bit on that Tiana resource center that you're putting together,
sure,
I think it
right
would.
Over there. It's where the old police barracks was. We have the SPAT program is run there through Cornell right now, and I'm a proud member of that group,
and the trustees.
And the trustees, and we thank you, Ed.
Right across from the
Can't forget the trustees.
Beach, yeah.
Right across from the pavilion on the bay side.
So what we've done is we've refurbished that building, putting on a new roof, get a paint job. The Cornell will be putting in a lab inside. We'll have touch tanks. We'll also have flupsies. We'll have upwellers to grow oyster. It won't be a nursery. It will be transferring spat there, and then we'll grow them. If you go over to the,
I thought it is a nursery. It's not a nursery.
We're not growing spat. We're growing spat, but we're not. We don't have algae. We're not growing algae to raise oyster. Not at this time. It's too small a scale. But we do have a lot of cages over there. If you go over there, it's a great place. Just go and visit. It's a lot of fun during the summer, from May through October, November, with a lot of people over there. So in conjunction with Cornell, we'll be doing programs there to help educate young people. We always have a lot of people come over and ask us questions on what's going on. It's a way to educate about the biology, to help people understand what oysters and what shellfish do, how much water they filter every day, which is an amazing amount of water that gets filtered.
50 gallons per oyster.
Roughly on a full-grown 40 to 50 gallons per oyster. So we're thinking of having a metric there. We can start to measure how many gallons we have filtered by how many oysters we grow as an incentive to grow more and more oysters. And the trustees have graciously participated and made that happen for us over there. And it's a parks building that we're using, but we want to do more of that if we can. We want to do 4 or 5 more spread out over throughout Southampton town as a place for people to learn how they can do it on their own, particularly those people who live close to the water. You can grow your own oysters. It's really easy. If you live on the water, it's not hard to do, and it's a lot of fun, and you get a reward.
Can you make money on it or no?
I think at some scale you could. It's oysters, shellfish are, as aquaculture programs, are an industry around the world. It's not so much here, but I think it could be.
I just have a quick question getting back on the septic issue. I had read an article recently about East Hampton Town, how they're getting ready to introduce legislation mandating some of these newer systems, especially closer to the water. And in some cases, the article made it sound like in many cases they were looking to reimburse fully for the systems with the CPF funds. And I'm just curious if you guys have seen the legislation yet that they're working on, and what are your thoughts on that? Are they planning on committing more CPF money, or do they think maybe they're going to have less people participating, that they're going to be able to reimburse people for these systems?
Well, I mean, we're in touch with East Hampton. Most of the East End towns are working in conjunction with these other CPF towns, working in conjunction. Some CPF funds have greater balances than others, but primarily Southampton, East Hampton are working fairly closely together. We're looking at legislation right now. We do have our group that is working to try to have those funds made available by third quarter of this year. That's sort of our goal. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of things have to be done and be put in properly for it to happen. Not the least of which is to have local law that allows that to happen. We are looking at local law. As a matter of fact, our water quality plan is online. You'll see where those high loading areas are. Those have been developed in conjunction with work that's ongoing through the county that's also developing those areas. But what we would like to do is a means test. I don't think it's reasonable to burden someone who may be on a fixed income, or maybe struggling with that full cost. So we're looking at incentive programs and rebate programs to do that based on the means test. And that's going to take a little bit of doing to get that properly vetted internally in our group. We're not sure where we're actually going with that, but that's the goal, is to end up with being able to help subsidize. The county originally said that they were going to help with these subsidies. That's in limbo right now. As a matter of fact, we have a meeting tomorrow morning that will help us find out more about that. We'll be meeting with Mr. Scully and the group that's leading that for the county effort.
So can I just add to that, John? So, I mean, most houses have traditional septic systems. You either have, if it's an old house, you probably just have a cesspool. If you haven't touched your system in 50 years, that's probably what you have. The more modern standard has been the septic tank, which catches the solids, and then the liquids go over to the cesspool, and then it recharges basically into the water. It's been fairly effective for drinking water. It's been a disaster for the bays and harbors because it doesn't get rid of the nitrogen at all. And then some people, educated people who were concerned, had wanted to put in advanced wastewater systems that remove the nitrogen, but the county wouldn't let them. The county was not allowing those systems up until very recently. Now there's, I think, 3 systems, or Kevin, is it more than 3 yet? It's more than 3? How many is it up to?
Approximately 5.
Okay, so the county...
Crusade got rejected, I know that. Are you including Crusade in that?
So the county is starting to allow these systems, which are a little more expensive than the conventional systems. But if you wanted to put one in, you could go now and get a Suffolk County permit to put in a system. It might cost you an extra $10,000 or $15,000, maybe less than that. What we have been considering at the town level is a mandate that when somebody is building a brand new house or a substantial expansion of their house, and they're in a zone that's within a 2-year contributory zone to the bays and harbors. So you flush the toilet, that nitrogen within 2 years is going to reach that bay and harbor. That it won't be an option for you. That you're going to be spending a lot of money anyway. You're going to have to probably do a brand new septic system. Might as well go to advanced wastewater. You're spending a lot of money on this home. So we are looking, now we might be able to provide some funding to buffer the difference between the conventional system and this advanced wastewater system through that CPF fund. I think East Hampton is going to do something very similar to that. And they're also trying to provide this pot of money for basically anybody who wants to upgrade, that they will help offset the cost for that upgrade. I don't know yet. We're trying to focus our money on where it matters most, in the areas closest to the bays and harbors. We only have limited resources. We have probably more than East Hampton does, but we want to make sure we maximize those resources, financial resources.
And I should point out that the systems that are available now mean that they're available now. So anybody in this room, you can go and get apply for a permit to have your system replaced with these new systems. And I'll tell you how that works. The systems, as they've been described to us now, and some we've seen and looked at, there is an overhead to them. There's about $300 a year. That's the estimated cost to maintain these systems. The county they'll be required to inspect them twice a year. That's part of the deal. These are all the things that we're working out with the county now. The subsidy, that's the one that's going back and forth a little bit, because clearly that's a huge expense. We enjoy the CPF, but the rest of the towns in Suffolk County do not, and it's still the same issue. They're still faced with the same issue. But you can go and do that. We would like to see that, They have to be installed by professional installers who've been trained to install these particular systems. In some cases, your old septic system would be removed. In some cases, it doesn't have to be. So it's done on a case-by-case basis. But really, it won't be much different than you would if you had your septic system replaced today. You'd still go through this exact same process, and that's the whole idea, to try to make it less painful, I guess, and for lack of a better term, to implement.
I think John answered my question. We have one of those systems. One of my neighbors does, right by Carter Creek. And it's been there, I guess, 14, 15 months. Our question that the neighbors have is that someone mentioned that there's a maintenance cost. You just mentioned $300. We thought it was $500.
It's possible.
It could be.
That's the number I've
Okay.
heard, 500.
Yeah, so there'll be a maintenance cost, and then someone has to make sure that the maintenance happens. Otherwise, we're back to the same problem.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you, Al.
There is one system that's not approved yet, unless Kevin tells me differently, that doesn't require that same type of maintenance. Some people have been calling it the layer cake system, but it's a very natural organic system that involves layers of sand and sawdust and uses natural biological processes, but it doesn't have the yearly maintenance costs. But the county also, and it's expected to actually last longer than a conventional septic system. But the county hasn't approved it yet. And the installation costs are no more, I don't believe, than a standard septic system either. So it's very promising technology that Stony Brook has been working on through that Clean Water Institute, but it hasn't been approved yet by the county. So that may be a game changer when that gets done, because you don't have the yearly maintenance, the costs are no greater than a standard septic system. And apparently it's relatively easy to install and doesn't take a lot of room. So it has a lot of pluses if it can get approved. And I hear that it's also, in terms of treating nitrogen, it's one of the best. Kevin, am I right in terms you're familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yes, that's correct.
In terms of bringing nitrogen levels down to very low levels, it's one of the best technologies, and it's the simplest. No moving parts. Yeah.
But so I just add to that too, because we talk about quite often we talk about nitrogen mitigation systems as in terms of dissolved nitrate. So we say, oh, okay, we're going to be 19 milligrams per liter. That's what the output's going to be on that system. But in fact it's more important to think about it in percent reduction. So if you and the reason I say that is because everybody in this room has a different nitrogen footprint. we have different types of effluent, and we produce different types of effluent. Some are nitrogen rich and some are less so. And the way we live has a lot to do with that. What we flush down our toilets does seriously impact how systems work and what we can mitigate. So that's one of the things that these types of technologies that the supervisor's talking about, I find really interesting, because it's what's been done in the past for a long time until we learned that by digging a hole we could hide everything, but that doesn't apply anymore. And so we're sort of reverting back to the natural process, and I think that's really great. And that's just converting. You're breathing nitrogen right now. About 80% of what you're breathing is nitrogen. That's the conversion. It's a gas, and it's as a dissolved gas in its various forms. It's a fertilizer. It's a nutrient. So that's the basic process. And I think it's a very, very cool thing. And I think I'd like to really see that get approved. Sorry.
Well, before we go to these technical things, I got a simple question. When are we going to get some bathrooms down by the canal and at the inlet? Somebody brings a kid there from 10 miles away. What do you tell him? Pee in the canal or pee in the bushes?
All right, well, I'll answer the canal one. So the town has a park. We've been calling it the Maritime Park, on the west side of Shinnecock Canal. And you may have noticed we took the gate. There used to be a fence up that was blocking the road.
Yes.
And there are plans to build a comfort station, a restroom in that location. I think that'll help a lot. I can't tell you exactly when that's going to happen. Sooner the better. But that is a beautiful park.
I mean, this is where people bring their kids. They come here to get fishing, get snappers in the fall.
I think it's great.
And these are places that kids learn to fish. And sport fishing
I'd like
is
to
still
see
a big
a
part of our
bathroom
economy.
Yeah, we'll have to make sure it's in the capital program.
And then the inlet.
The
There's
inlet-
tons of people down there, and those restaurants don't want them running in there.
Yeah, the
With
inlet.
Callahan's, we used to run in there with the waiters on. They didn't.
It's not. I don't see it there. It's a county. Well, that parking lot at the end is owned by the county.
The county doesn't do anything but
Yeah.
take it out. They tell you. The garbage.
When we own, the town owns. Well, the commercial dock is actually owned by the county. The town manages that.
Oh, is
I don't think there's a public bathroom there. And then across a little bit further, at Ponquag Pavilion would be the nearest public bathroom.
That's too far for the guys on the
But
TV.
to get a public bathroom out at the end by the Shinnecock Inlet, I think you probably have to talk to the county on that one.
The county.
There was a porta potty there a couple of years ago, but Sandy put it in the
Yeah, I
bay.
know. When they were working on the. Yeah, Sandy took it away, but they never replaced it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that Oakland's doesn't appreciate everybody coming, unless you got to buy.
They can't
buy
get
dinner.
in it. They just ignore them. Get out of here. They smell like crazy with the fish that they've been. The other thing is that I have
maybe
dreamed,
porta potties can be brought back there. It's possible. We can look at it.
I have dreamed that Hampton Bays someday would be a beautiful town. I've lived here 70 years. I'm 91 years old, going for 92. I had a stroke last fall, and that set me back. And so I started to say, there's a lot of things I've had on my mind. One is Pond Grove Bridge. You go to the end, no boardwalk. You could go to Tiana, you could go to the inlet. Bicyclists come down that road on Dune Road, they take their life in their hands. There's no sidewalk along, and it's underwater half the time. Yeah. Those boardwalks could be put up like other towns have it, and have it for both wide enough for runners, walkers, you name it. The bridge you have, Ponko Bridge, has, I bet you, hundreds of people go over it every day. And when they get to the other side, there's nothing to walk on except the bridge back again, or take the road down to the inlet or something.
Walk on the beach.
Well, not all of them have good shoes for walking on the beach. For walking on that bridge. Yeah. And bicyclists definitely can't go down on it.
Well, I'll say this one thing about Dune Road. I mean, we have been working, the trustees, the town, we're all working very hard to see Dune Road elevated so that it doesn't flood all the time. And, we're hoping that the federal government, through that, what's called FIMP, which is the Fire Island to Montauk reformulation study, Fire Island to Montauk Point, that's where the FIMP comes from, that there will be some funding in the next round that may go toward elevating Dune Road. That would be great, and then we're going to try to make it happen if that funding is available. And we've all asked for it, and we're all hoping. And when we do elevate it, it'll be a little bit wider than what it currently is, so you should have room for bikes on it as well.
But it does, if you don't put the wide enough away from traffic for people that are walking, a dark clothed person, I've often almost hit going on that Dune Road when they have dark clothes or dark on a bicycle. You can't see them until you're right on top of them. It's a very dangerous situation.
It is.
And I'm sure sooner or later somebody's going to get really seriously hurt. And it's all the way to Quogue and up. They could do the same thing, but they have no. Yeah. They have a sidewalk in Quogue to the side, an old one, that they can get off the Dune Road to get to that.
Right. Now, in terms of boardwalk, I mean, we are talking at Ponquag Pavilion of renovating Ponquag Pavilion and extending the walkway onto the beach a little bit and expanding the deck up there. And I'm going to be asking the board to try to advance that project so we see it that construction happen sooner than later. But that'll, when you come over that Palmquag Bridge, you'll at least be able to walk down to a beautiful refurbished Palmquag Pavilion and onto the beach.
It's going to be a beauty. Well, it's good for the town. I appreciate you doing this because it's been there quite a few years. Goes back, I'd say 30 years or so ago, they started to build that.
Which now the pavilion? That's about 60 years.
Yeah, well, the pavilion, but they've had to rebuild parks and parking lots and stuff around there. And also Tiana, I remember when that was built. That was built, it's more recent than Palmquag that they built that in there. I have pictures of it, how big the bluffs were ahead of it. And now they keep refilling. It just has the dunes get washed away no matter what they put there.
Can't fight Mother Nature.
You know what? You brought up an interesting point that the supervisor actually seized on that I want to add on while there's people here. That's the Fire Island to Montauk plan, the FIMP plan. That, well, devil's in the details. There's one issue that we recognize. I mean, there's several issues, but as the trustees of the town and the fact that we are a unique town, there has to be a representation in that plan that acknowledges the fact that the trustees hold an easement in behalf of the public dating back to prior to formation of the country. And we've basically sent letters off and have verbally expressed the fact that that needs to be in there. We are unique and we need to remain unique, and that means that that easement that is there in behalf of the public must be intact, unencumbered, period. So any plan that the federal government has to come in to try and bolster anything up, that's fine, but it also has to make sure that it doesn't infringe upon the unique character of the community and the fact that we're one of the last trustee boards that holds that easement from the crest of the dune to the high tide mark in behalf of the public for the ability to enjoy the beach, just like the supervisor said, beaches, for everybody in the town to enjoy. Well, one of the ways that you make sure that's rock solid is that we must insist that in that FIMP plan there's an acknowledgement for the Southampton Town Board of Trustees. We're your representatives. So I'm glad that the gentleman brought it up and you piqued the supervisor to mention that, because I think it's important for the public to be educated to the fact that the trustees hold that easement dating back to the Dongan Patent 1686, and it needs to be strengthened and enforced. And it needs to be in that plan. It wasn't in that plan at its onset when it was rolled out. Trustee President Warner and myself went to the college. We voiced our concerns for that. We followed up with a letter that it's got to be incorporated in there. So thank you for bringing that up, Jay.
I'd just like to add to that because it's part of an even broader issue, and that's coastal resiliency and sea level rise, and the fact that we're a coastal community and we will and we are being impacted by sea level rise right now. And it's difficult, I think, for a municipality to plan ahead for something that is not too well defined. We know that we're experiencing sea level rise. We don't know to the extent of how that's going to impact us, but we need to be absolutely prepared for that. And the first line of defense are our trustees in that respect. Some of these things have unbelievable cost to them. If you think about other communities, how you protect communities from rapid sea level rise. So it's a broader discussion, and I would suggest, Maria, that this would be a good conversation to have in the future for other panels, because it's the long-term thing. I think Mark would have a lot to contribute to that discussion as well, as to how do we prepare for this as a community.
I'd like to add one of the components on this FIMS plan is basically the ability for the public to access the beaches. And in the town of Southampton, we have the trustee roads, and in discussion with the people of the Army Corps, they spent millions, I believe $70 million up in
$80 million
to buy access rights to the beaches. So maybe we can get a little bit more money here, being that we have all the trustee roads and the town accesses for the public to the beaches. They didn't even recognize that the trustees existed at that meeting, and Scott and I stepped forward and explained to them who we are and what we are, and we were here long before you guys even existed. So now that we're in the conversation, they take us pretty seriously. So I'm hoping that, talking about getting money to raise Dune Road, it might be a lot easier in the town of Southampton, because we have all these access points that they're not going to spend millions of dollars to buy for the public.
We made sure your voices were heard. We were your representatives to make sure your voices were heard. Okay? So just pay attention to that moving forward. It's real important for the public. Okay?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for everything and for listening to us. Three quick things. One, the gentleman before me made me think, wow, wouldn't it be really awesome if you could build a bike trail all the way from Hampton Bays to Montauk? Wouldn't that be great? Could you work on that next? Two questions. One about Dune Road. Because I remember when I did my agonizing review of the capital budget, that there was, I think, $1 million in the I think it said that there was an overlay that was done, and then there was $1 million roll in the capital budget for 2017 for the elevation of Dune Road. Is that going to be used for anything, or is it just a placeholder while you're looking for other monies?
The town has authorized $1 million in the past for it to, and we might have to authorize a little bit more in terms of capital borrowing. That money is still there, the $1 million.
Right, no, I know it's still there. That's why I was wondering whether it was going to be used for anything this year, whether it was just a placeholder while maybe you were seeking grant money, or whether it's just a roll.
There was money in the past, I think, that ended up not getting spent on Dune Road, that got spent on other roads. But I think that $1 million that you're referring to is still there. I'm not expecting with the FIMP to get the entirety of Dune Road funded. Be lucky if we get it halfway funded, and then let's say it's a $5 million project. If we get $3 million, we still have to come up with $2 million, and that $1 million might be part of it.
So it may be a placeholder, but
we're gonna have to go back to the board, see what we get out of the federal government to try to see if we can come up with the difference. And there may be various contributions. There might be some property owners along Dune Road who want to contribute. That's could be a piece of it. But the last thing I want to do is to raise people's taxes. So
right, no, I understand. The money is there. It's rolled. You don't have a plan for it right now. It's not enough.
It's not enough. So likely we'll be having a conversation at the board level when we see what the difference is, to see how to bridge that funding difference. We're trying to get close. Right now we're not close. At one point I thought we had $3 million from Suffolk County that was pass-through money from the state. We did not get that $3 million. We've been trying to find creative ways to fund the elevating of Dune Road. And right now we're hoping we've made, I thought, a pretty cogent argument to the feds that elevating Dune Road was necessary for them to implement the rest of their FIMP plan, which is basically they want to maintain the profile of the beaches in the section west of the Shinnecock Inlet, all the way down to Tiana. And for them to be able to access those areas, they're going to need a road to access those areas, because it's not all going to be dredged. A lot of it's going to be sand that is trucked into the location. And if you have a flooded road, you can't move that sand around. You can't get heavy equipment there. So they seemed responsive to our argument that for them to be able to implement their plan, they needed to help us elevate Dune Road. And so we're keeping our fingers crossed, so to speak, that we're going to get some money for Dune Road. Initially, we got nothing.
Okay.
To bolster your argument, too, my understanding at that meeting was that after 30 years, they were never coming back again. They were going to do the FIMP plan. They're never coming back again. They're turning it over to the local municipalities to deal with it beyond that. That was my understanding. And if that's the case, that's just going to burden us if we don't get the infrastructure set the way it needs to be. And that's why it's so important to recognize the trustee in the plan, trustees, because if they're going to turn it over to some local municipality erosion control districts, there has to be a strong board of trustees that's going to look after the interest of the folks that live in this town but don't live on the ocean coast.
We're looking out for you, too. So in the town board's letter to the feds, we also mentioned the trustees and the importance.
Because the trustees is just everybody in this room. We're just your voice. That's all we are. So there's all great stuff going on, but we're unique. It's not cookie cutter. The feds are all throughout the entire country.
You guys are unique.
And we are unique. And we pride ourselves in being unique. So we're making sure that that's locked down and it's done the right way.
What my other question that I originally came up with was just back to the CPF for a minute, and the systems, the advanced wastewater systems that have been approved to date, are they patented, or are they just systems that any contractor can put together, or are these patented systems?
The ones that are approved, they're all proprietary. They're all patented.
Proprietary.
They have local installers who are trained to install them.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, they're up to 4 or 5 systems now. The one I mentioned, that vertical system of layers, that is non-proprietary as far as I understand it. So anybody will be able to install that. There's no patent that's associated with that. But the systems approved so far, you have to buy from the manufacturer through their agent.
Is there any?
I'm sorry. Just to add to that, there's a couple of ways you can get more information. The last meeting we had out in East Hampton, which I think was very informative, talks about each of the systems. The manufacturers were there that can describe that to those. That's well worth finding that. It's on CTV. Charles is here. He can probably tell you exactly where it is, and you can watch that. I think that's very informative. And also, I was just informed tonight that the Conservation Board will be hosting some manufacturers as well as other stakeholders to start to describe that, because they want to start getting on with the business of approving systems, particularly around wetlands and those kinds of areas. So there'll be a lot of that information available. You can also contact me. I've got the lists of those systems, at least the 3 that I know that are approved now, and I'm glad to hear that there may be more. They're going to roll out more systems over the next year and a half as well. Mm-hmm. So, but the one thing I do want to say is that some of these systems, which I think is very important, is that they are designed to keep the same profile or get as close to it, but in particular the ones that mitigate phosphorus.
What I wanted to get to actually with the systems is, whether or not the town. And I don't think there's a requirement, or maybe the town has a policy, or there's any way that the town could maybe, support the local businesses through all this. I mean, if you're a local business, you're going to be subjected to having to buy from these 2 businesses, or these 2. Well, you said there's 3 proprietary, one non-proprietary, and 3.
Well, the non-proprietary one is not approved yet.
Okay.
So we believe there's as many as 5 potentially that have been.
Well, those that are proprietary, you're kind of forcing people to purchase, from a small group of manufacturers. And, at different times, 2 things on that. One, that can encourage manufacturers to up their prices. One manufacturer can tend to kind of, I don't want to call it a monopoly, but sort of, end up for some reason getting more businesses. So, is there a way that the town, or has the town given any thought to how it could open up the competition, if you will? And has the town given any thought to how it could require, if it doesn't already do so, those companies and or the manufacturers and or the contractors to employ more local folks, either as subcontractors, employees, or more local contractors to be trained as installers?
Absolutely, and you touched on a sore point early on with this program, and that was how do we keep the economy local? Because they were requiring that we have that they use licensed installers, and they have to get trained and so forth. And so the first question to the legislator was, well, how do our people get trained? And I'm really happy to report that a large number of installers and people that you all know, and we've all had our septic systems pumped at one time and installed. Those companies that have availed themselves of that training are now certified installers. So that was a big issue that we wanted to keep. Whatever we could derive locally to help our economy, that's what we wanted to do. And that also includes excavation, how that's done. The companies themselves, my worry was that they weren't able to produce enough of the systems in time. So that's been done. That's okay. That'll work. but we're very cognizant of keeping it local and trying to allow the ability for people to earn money from this effort.
Would there be any consideration that towards, instead of individuals having to hire their contractors or rely on a list of approved contractors, which the town, I don't know, might be reluctant to do, but for the town to put out contracts for the replacement of these systems, and then folks could apply to the town and have the contractor itself, through the town's contract, do the work, which would just, I think, help a lot of people get the work done. I know there's an insurance issue, but the wherewithal for some people maybe to get a contractor might be lacking. And would the town even consider, or has it thought about doing a requirements?
There are a lot of installers out here, and so that doesn't seem to be a problem. If we're looking at 300 to 400 units installed, in the initial year for new construction, and whatever the numbers are for people who want to volunteer to do that, which they're perfectly able to do, and how much the town offers as a rebate and incentive on that, what portion of that total cost. So, if the total cost is $7,000 to $12,000, that would be part of that cost. How that's actually costed out. The key here is that we didn't feel that as a town that we could bear that overhead to basically have another department that would oversee that. That just seemed to be a very high burden.
Hire a consultant, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but we have the county that's taken on a large part of that responsibility, and I think they've taken it really, really seriously. And so far, so good. It's worked out well. So I think we're probably finding sort of a split, which is kind of what we do now. When you want a septic system put in, you have to get a DEC permit. It's still got to be inspected. It's got to be approved. They have to approve the installer. That's how that all works. So.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
I know town did do something with solar installers along the lines. It wasn't a requirements contract, but the town did an RFP and was able to get various solar installers to basically say if you did a certain number of people signed up for a program that you deliver the system at a reduced price. And you remember, like, through the Tri-Energy program?
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible as these technologies are rolling out that we can do something like that and say, okay, if we bring you 30 people who all want advanced wastewater, you'll reduce the per unit price by 10% or whatever it might be. It may be a way to get the price down. I like the free market. I think to have competition is a good thing, and people know that they've got to outbid the other systems if they're going to get the job. So the more systems the county approves, I think the lower the price will be. This is kind of new, so initially the prices might be higher as some of these installers don't know what they're getting into yet. But I certainly hope that they go to the local hardware stores and lumber yards to buy some of the piping that's associated with some of the parts. And they use local excavators to install these systems and local electricians. Only to some degree. I mean, the town we've got enough on our plate. We don't want to get involved with helping homeowners pick various installers for their septic systems.
We did look at that. I mean, part of the model for what we were doing was what's called Section 208 in Cape Cod, but we looked around at other municipalities and the successes and the failures, and I think the one that seemed to work best was what happened in the Chesapeake Watershed Authority. But there they were dealing with systems that mitigate at different levels. So they were able to build up a formula to allow, okay, if you get a system that mitigates less, you're going to pay more into it. If you get one that mitigates more, it's more expensive. You pay less into it as a measure. So and I got to give credit to Janice Shearer, our principal planner in the town of Southampton. She came up with a great idea, which is a nitrogen credit, and so we're exploring that. So if there's an incentive not only to acquire the systems but to reduce the nitrogen output as a percent reduction as opposed to a percentage of dissolved nitrate, that would be a good thing to do. So those are all ways that we could hopefully offset some of that. But I think for our town, we saw it quickly. We saw some really spectacular failures in other municipalities when they tried to do that. So we got a little scared off of that. because we just didn't think we had the employees, and as Jay is so apt to so quickly to point out, we don't want to raise taxes, and that would probably be a consequence of it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to,
Last one, right?
Right, last one. This lady's been so patient. So this will be our last question.
It's not really a question, but 8 months ago, the Hampton Bays voters voted down a bond for the Hampton Bays Library. So I was surprised to see in the newspaper a while ago that it was to be another bond voted on again. I went in to see the director, Susan LaVista, and I wanted to know if there were any meetings going to be coming up, because I would be interested to find out what's changed. I thought that the community voting down the previous bond meant that they were going to fix things on an as-needed basis, piecemeal. Obviously, that's not the case. She told me that at that time there was not going to be another meeting. And I asked her how she planned to inform the community, and she said we're going to be sending out information by mail. I asked when. This was a couple weeks ago, and she said this Friday. I'm a Hampton Bays voter. I'm a full-time resident. I waited patiently for 2 weeks. I haven't received anything. I do know that you said she came in today.
Let me just add in. She just came in today. I got it in the mail today. And she said it just went out. And she said that, and that's why she was sick, because she was saying otherwise she would have come here to be able to answer questions and whatever. But she was asking everybody to come on the, what did I say, the 7th, I think. But she said she's also available to answer questions, you know.
Well, she answered my questions, but I just don't understand how other people who aren't here tonight would find out about the vote. Because it's important that the right steps be taken to inform the voters that there's a long-term bond vote coming up on March 14th. And when I asked Susan, you know, approximately how long we'll be paying that off, she said probably 30 years. I know she mentioned that there would be an adjoining property purchased for parking. I said, is that the whole lot going to be used for parking? And she said no, that the building would probably be staffed and used by the Friends of the Library. And I don't remember hearing that last year, so this is new. People can vote for this if they want it. They can vote against it, but they need to know about it. And I believe the Hampton Bays Library needs help getting the word out to the Hampton Bays voters or anyone who's going to be paying for this 30-year long-term bond. Personally, I don't think we need a new library. I went to the meeting last year. I listened to a presentation by the director, and I wasn't convinced last year, and I'm not convinced now. They're calling it a renovation, but it's really a gut renovation. They're going to gut it and rebuild it new, keeping the foundation and the brick, which would require, you know, everything having to be to code, a new sprinkler system, and all that stuff's not needed. I don't want to hold up too much time, but I do have some experience. I was a president of my condo in the city. We renovated an 1890 brick and brownstone tenement house, and we put on a new roof and did repointing and windows, and it did run into the thousands, but not millions. So I don't know where she's getting those figures from. I personally don't think we need a new library.
Well, you know, and I think, I don't know about the process, but I think it's not in the realm of the trustees, and I think it's so localized, right, Jay? It's not even within your purview.
It's not a town function.
Yeah,
no.
it's not a town function.
However,
So this isn't really the venue for it. I mean, I understand your concern.
No, it is. I think it is the right venue in terms of the Civic.
Yeah.
It is.
Yes,
to bring
that's
up front.
true.
It's not the
Absolutely.
topic of the conversation, but it is the right place.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Well, I did go to the press on Monday, and supposedly they're going to be running my letter that I submitted to them, and I'm going to be putting up flyers in town too, because it's just It's very expensive, and we are Hampton Bays. We're not Southampton. We're not West Hampton Beach. And people can make up their own mind, but they just need to know that it's happening on March 14th.
I could say
That's why I announced it.
just as a citizen, all these elections, that don't happen on election day, I think is very confusing to the public. I wish it was like November when people are accustomed to voting. That's when the school board vote should be. That's when all these bonds should be, because people would come out. I think nobody's expecting March 14th, you say, to be election day, and it's a decision that will affect them. Some may like the decision, some may not like it, but a lot of people, a lot of people aren't going to know about it. That's why, I just think somehow they should figure out a way to make, one day a year is the day that all these things get voted on. Make it as convenient as possible for
But
people.
it was voted down less than
Right.
8 months ago. I don't understand why it's being voted.
Yeah.
That's a history out here. They don't get it the first time, they try to get it a second time.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I thank you, and I thank you for your concern. And Jay, I love your idea because I have the same frustration. I was kind of thrown about the timing of it also.
Right.
That I would love to have a day where basically all the votes were held and not on disparate days.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate all your input.
All right, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.